I have a huge bookshelf. That this is not
Yeah,
my
I know.
primary.
Well,
That's kind of like
I like some of the books there. Steve Pinker's. I'd rather have mine.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. I am joined again with Mr. Lawrence Krauss, theoretical physicist. People don't know who you are, obviously. A couple of your big books there. I'd say Universe from Nothing is a classic already, right?
Well, I don't know. It's not up to me to say. It was very popular and
Right.
it seems to continue to be popular. So I guess it might be called a classic. It affected a lot of people and it was translated into a lot of languages. So anyway, it seemed to have an impact. Let's put it that
Right. We're going to be discussing some cosmology and some science,
way.
things that are obviously you would be one of the best people to talk to about. So in Universe from Nothing, you talk about how if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, you can get whole space-times from basically nothing. But when you say nothing, you say no space and no time. But what do you think has always existed? Because when you say nothing, do you mean something like the quantum foam? What exactly do you mean there?
Well, to first approximation doesn't really matter. And the second approximation, I don't know and no one knows. But it's not as if anything always had to be there. Time and space could have just simply come into being when our space popped into existence. There may not have been anything before. In fact, the whole notion of before doesn't really mean anything if time began at our Big Bang. Of course, our universe could have popped into existence in the midst of, a pre-existing universe or space-time. It's a separate space-time, and that could have been there forever. What I'm talking about is that our universe did not exist, and then it existed. The key point is that it suddenly came into existence, and therefore whatever might have pre-existed is a totally different question, and it's something it could be turtles all the way down. You could ask if any space existed beforehand, and that space created, etc., etc., etc. But people seem to think that our universe would be created within some existing space, and it's not. It would just suddenly appear as a closed space-time. But it's also, as I say, it's also possible that literally nothing existed and a closed space-time popped into existence. Namely, there was no pre-existing space at all, and there was no time, and therefore you can't even ask what happened before. All of those are viable options, and until we have a theory of quantum gravity to understand it, we don't understand the answer. Our universe could have spontaneously emerged, literally popped into existence. So it's not as if anything was there before our universe was there. Everything that we see, all the space and time and materials, did literally not exist, and then they came into existence. So I don't really know a more appropriate way to say that nothing than that.
Right. Well, we have different models of the universe. And, obviously, when you get to that point, it's kind of speculation, but, we have the
It is.
eternal cycle model, which I know you don't subscribe to.
It's not as if I subscribe. Let me make this clear. It's not as if I can choose or subscribe to anything. I think things are likely or unlikely, and yeah. So there's some possibilities that I think are more likely than others. But until any of us have a real theory of quantum gravity, all of it is just talk.
It's interesting to think about, maybe we have kind of a Janus phase universe, an hourglass with the Big Bang in the middle, going the other direction from us, things of that nature. It's
I mean, people have talked about a lot, and they've talked about, as you say, they've talked about a cyclic universe, which and different people have different versions of a cyclic universe. None of those seem well founded to me, based on the physics that we know. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that they don't have. I don't think they're well motivated. I think they require extending. They require far more than just assuming a universe spontaneously emerged. And often you have to stand on your head in these models to try and make any kind of sense of them. But all bets are off when it comes to t equals 0 because we don't have a theory. What I can say, and what I have said in the universe of nothing and other places, is that if you asked what a universe that was almost 14 billion years old that emerged spontaneously from nothing would look like, in general, it would look exactly like the universe we live in. That doesn't prove that's the case, but I think it's highly suggestive.
Right. So you don't buy this from nothing, nothing comes. That's not something that's founded in science. Is that
It's
pretty
not
much
something that's
right?
found in science. It's not found in anything. It's someone made the statement, and it's nice that they make the statement, and it may be based on experience or common sense, but we've long ago learned that science supplants common sense when it comes to the universe, that what we think is natural or normal need not be natural or normal in the universe. And so it's a
Right.
nice statement from nothing, nothing comes, or whatever, however you want to call it. It's it looks good, but it doesn't mean anything more than any other revelation about the universe, because revelation doesn't involve knowledge.
Yeah, that's investigation, right?
Yeah, I mean,
That's
the key point is that it seems to violate everything we can think of, that our universe could come from nothing. But so many other aspects of quantum mechanics violate everything we classically could have thought of, and we know it works. Um,
right.
and just because we don't like the idea that time may have had a beginning, uh, the universe doesn't exist to make us happy either.
Right. Yeah, I like to remember that the universe used to be very small, at least our visible universe. So it used to be on the quantum level. And so we know we get all kinds of quantum weirdness.
That's exactly right. Now that's the point. That's the key point to make. And I made it in another one of my books called Atom. We can follow we know our Big Bang happened, and we know our universe was much smaller than it is today. We can follow it back and test our ideas back to at least the first second in the history of the universe, and maybe much earlier. And as if we extrapolate that using no quantum gravity, but just straightforward physics, we come back to at very early times. The entire visible universe was contained in a region, perhaps the size of an atom, or something like that, where obviously quantum processes are important. And that's why someone like me, as a particle physicist, got interested in cosmology 40 some odd years ago. Think about it, because the universe is expanding. The largest scale structure in the universe was once determined by the smallest scale forces in nature. And so if as you get larger and larger and larger, and you eventually look at the universe as a whole, to understand how it got that way, you really have to understand physics at the smallest scales. It's a beautiful and poetic kind of circle. And that's unavoidable. So that we know, that in order to understand essentially what we see today, we have to understand fundamental physics on the small scales. And I find that very exciting as a particle physicist, because it means the universe can give us information about nature on the small scales as well as the larger scales.
I think you don't really hold philosophy in too high of a regard, or
No, well,
metaphysics.
look, everyone, that's a myth,
Okay.
because I make fun of something. Philosophy is important and an important area of study, but when it comes to physics, philosophy doesn't have any impact anymore. It's the
Yep.
first approximation. It did, but physics has moved away from philosophy. There's philosophy of science and there are philosophers of science, but they don't, and they do things that is maybe relevant to philosophy, but they don't impact on the day-to-day workings of physicists, and they don't drive the questions that physicists ask, like they do in, say, neuroscience or consciousness studies. Their philosophy does drive the questions that scientists ask.
I was going to ask you about the foundations of metaphysics. So we have different ideas like foundationalism, which basically says there's a hierarchy and there's something at the bottom level, a foundation of reality. Then there's I think it's called infinitism, kind of infinite regress, and then there's coherentism, which I believe things laterally found support each other. Do you have any idea?
I've never heard of any of those, and
Okay.
most isms. When I hear about an ism, I
Yeah.
generally took open my book to something else.
No, it's a metaphysical
Well, I mean,
concepts and
metaphysics may
foundation.
be interesting, but and some of what I'm talking about when I talk about multiverses is right now metaphysical, but the whole interest as a physicist is to turn metaphysics into physics, is to find experimental signatures that might exist that allow you to test ideas. Otherwise, it's just, in my opinion, talk, and it's talk that may be interesting talk, but it doesn't impact on physics. That's the key point.
Would you say the Big Bang? the earliest, time of the Big Bang was fine-tuned, because we know it was very low entropy, simple but low entropy.
Well, Roger Penrose likes to talk about this. First of all, once again, we don't know the initial conditions of the universe. So to talk about what's fine-tuning or not, you have to have a theory to know if something's fine-tuned, and we have no theory. But
Past
also,
hypothesis, right?
Fine-tuning is in the eye of the beholder. It could be that there's an extremely large universe, and all you need is some small region of the universe to be in an initial configuration that can, say, allow for inflation. And that region will eventually grow to be arbitrarily large and encompass not just our universe, but potentially an infinite number of universes. And so if you have many different regions, then you'll find that some regions might allow inflation and others wouldn't, and we would exist in a region that allowed inflation. So fine-tune arguments require you to know more, and you have to know the whole phase space of possibilities. You have to know what's possible, to know and then you have to have a probability distribution over all the possibilities to ask if the configuration you're in is fine-tuned. And we don't have any of that. So I don't tend to buy those fine-tuning arguments.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of arguments as far as if you're trying to make like a theistic argument for fine-tuning, there's a lot of different, responses to that. And one of them that's interesting is
any theistic argument to anything doesn't make sense to me. So I don't understand that there are things that appear to be fine-tuned in our universe, including the cosmological constant, the energy of empty space, but it's not. There's no evidence. First of all, there's no evidence that requires an intelligent designer to fine-tune. And secondly, it's not particularly fine-tuned in the sense that it's not fine-tuned for life. Sure, it looks like it's fine-tuned for life, but it could have a different value that would be more reasonable, and there'd be more life in the universe. So throughout the history of science and physics in particular, there have been certain discoveries of quantities that appear to be very strange. And almost inevitably, people have come up with the anthropic argument that maybe there's many, maybe if it were any different, we wouldn't be here. And the point is that, and in almost all cases, once we've had a fundamental theory, it hasn't been fine-tuned at all. We understand how it arose. The same may be true for the parameters of our universe that appear to be fine-tuned or appear to be strange. So we tend to resort to these fine-tuning arguments or anthropic arguments when we don't have anything better to do, when we don't have a theory. But almost inevitably in physics, when theories have come along, those arguments have gone out. Now, who knows in this case whether anthropic arguments went out? They're much more compelling in the case of the cosmological constant than they were in other areas of physics.
Yeah, I mean, some of the arguments or the rebuttals to those types of arguments are we only have one sample size, so we don't know. We can't, like you said, we don't have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
Also,
we do have a fundamental theory that tells us in general there can be many different universes, and there could be different laws of physics in each universe and different fundamental quantities. So we have a fundamental reason for thinking that there might be an anthropic landscape, if you want to call it that. But as you say, we know of one universe, and until we can get better probes, we'll never be able to probe other universes directly. But as I've shown with a colleague, Frank Wilczek, you might be able to do experiments that would make it clear those other universes existed, even if you couldn't probe them directly.
Yeah, I don't know if you know what's her name, Laura Mersini Houston. She has a book called Before the Big Bang.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I read her book, and she talks about kind of like the applying quantum gravity or quantum mechanics to the landscape of string theory to get her idea of a multiverse. And she thinks her and her colleagues have discovered kind of fingerprints or impacts of other universes in the cosmic microwave background.
I don't think that's likely. Let me just say that. I don't think anyone but her and her colleagues think that they've discovered anything.
They think they discovered something.
I know her, and I've known her since she was a graduate student, in fact. Anyway.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting book. But yeah, also we could have different kinds of life, that very different from us if the conditions were different. And also if the natural laws or natural patterns in nature didn't allow life, then we would need magic, and that would be more kind of evidence for something magical, I think. So
I mean, exactly. If we discovered it was impossible to live in our universe and we were still here, then that would be interesting. But
yeah,
it's not. Our universe. In fact, in most places in our universe, it is impossible for us to live. That's the other thing. Our universe isn't teeming with life, as far as we know. It may be, but there's no evidence of it. Certainly, most of the universe is quite inhospitable, and the universe is often trying to kill us. So this argument about the universe being quite hospitable to life is an overstatement, if you want to call it that. It's true that if the conditions or fundamental parameters are quite different, we might not be here. But as you pointed out, there could be other life forms that may be quite different, and then they would be asked the question: why is the universe fine-tuned for us? That. So
any deity would need to be fine-tuned also, right? Any deity would need to be, any kind of deity, something you could call a deity, would need to be very fine-tuned, even more so.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the great thing about a deity is it is all you throw reason out the window. So I mean,
you're adding something even more complex and improbable.
Well, you think that there'd be something that a deity would be more complex than the things it created. You think that, but then they'll say, well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and that's like putting your fingers in your ears and going, ah. I mean, you just eventually at some point you say, I can't explain it, but I believe it's out there. And okay, fine.
Saying the Lord works in mysterious ways looks very suspiciously like random stuff happens. Or just,
well, no, I think it's even worse than random. I think random is much more reasonable. No, what they're saying is the Lord does things that seem to be impossible, and we don't understand it. And that's one way of trying to study the world. The other way is to try and actually understand it. And I choose the latter.
Speaking about time quickly, we know time is kind of part of the fabric of space-time, according to Einstein. And there's different theories of it, like different metaphysics of time, like presentism, a growing block universe, basically past, present, and future kind of all exist simultaneously. A and B theory of time maps onto that a bit. Do you have any take on that? What you subscribe to?
No, I mean, time is a very useful quantity in physics, and it seems very real to me. Now, it turns out in certain pictures of quantum gravity, where time and space are tied together, that we know. And it could be that the wave function of the universe describes probabilities for all of space and all of time. In that picture, time, past, present, and future all exist, and in that wave function, and therefore, all of time already exists in that wave function, or at least probabilities do. And we're a slice, and we see time as if it travels, and that may be true, but once again, I'm a kind of parochial kind of, pedantic kind of physicist. I just sort of think that right now, if we want to make predictions about the future, and the future does appear to be different than the past right now, and for us, and we can make predictions, and that's what I'm interested in. But it could be at some fundamental level, if there's a theory of quantum gravity, that theory argues that all of space-time exists, and that time, as we see it, is an illusion. But that doesn't. Who cares if it's an illusion? The question is, how did that illusion arise? Consciousness may be an illusion, but it's still relevant if you get kicked in the shins or jilted by a lover or something. And I feel that way about time. It may be an illusion, but it doesn't add anything for me to say it's illusion. Look, this table is solid, but that's an illusion. Most of it's empty space. So who cares if it's an illusion? The question is, how did the table arise, and what are the laws of physics that allow it to arise? And that's what I care about.
I think in the edge of knowledge, you call time the most personal aspect of the universe, something to that effect. I think that's probably right when you reflect on it.
Perhaps nothing more personal than time, because we often feel like we have so little of it, and everything and all of our experience is framed in terms of the precious moments of time and so and that's why I began my book with time. And it's also why I ended my book with consciousness, because consciousness is the most complex and least understood of any of the things I talk about.
Right. The relationship between entropy and complexity seems counterintuitive. If we have increasing entropy disorder in the universe, how can complexity arise? And I think I have a pretty good grasp of it from what I've read. You can have pockets of complexity that still increase entropy overall, local complexity that still increases. But what would you
Here's the deal. Entropy is irrelevant for closed systems. It's a quantity that describes how closed systems evolved. Open systems, namely things that interact with an external source, a heat sink or a source of energy, the things are quite different. If you input energy into a system, you can increase its complexity. It's free energy. Snowflakes in a snowstorm, or they form these beautiful patterns that appear to be complexity of nothing, but there's energy being input in. So if a system can, like, and we're here on Earth, that's why life can evolve complexity. If it weren't for the sun and the fact that we are constantly bombarded by energy, life couldn't have originated or persist. So local pockets of complexity, of course, can happen, and they have to be restored by the input of energy. And then when that energy ends, then once again, and it's a closed system, then entropy, then the system is ultimately doomed to, in the long term, result in a state of disorder.
Right. I remember the examples of the perfume and the pouring cream into coffee.
Yeah.
So you start simple but low entropy, and you end simple at high entropy, but in the middle you can get a lot of interesting things and intricate things going on.
Yeah, I mean, in every single configuration in that pouring cream in coffee, every single configuration is incredibly special, but it happens.
Yeah, getting on to quantum mechanics, do you think that the Higgs causes the micro macro difference because of the element of mass that it brings to things?
The Higgs causes the micro macro.
Could it be responsible for that?
Well, for the most part, the Higgs is the reason the universe looks the way it does, that most particles have mass. I mean, it turns out the particles that make up protons and neutrons have some mass independent of the Higgs. But the Higgs creates the Higgs field, because it exists, allows the universe that we see to exist. So yes, it creates the distinction between micro and macro.
And if on the quantum level there were more mass, then it would perhaps approach how things behave macroscopically on our level. Is that?
No, on the micro level, if it weren't for the Higgs, then most particles would be massless, and matter, as we know, wouldn't exist. And so we wouldn't be here to discuss the question. There's this background field in nature that causes particles to have the properties they have, that they appear to have, and allows for the formation of stable matter. And the Higgs, because the Higgs field forms with the way it does, and we still don't know why it forms the way it does, I should say. There's no fundamental reason why the Higgs field has the properties it has. We're trying to understand that. But because it does have the properties it has, the universe looks the way it does. If it had different properties, the universe would look quite different.
Well, you say quantum mechanics is, although it's unpredictable, it's still deterministic.
Quantum mechanics is, of course, deterministic. It's the way
I've read many places that it's not. They're wrong. Not deterministic. Okay, I've heard that it is too.
As described by the Schrödinger equation, is a second-order differential equation. If you define the wave function at time t equals 0, and you know all the relevant forces, etc., and the Hamiltonian, then the wave function is determined for all future times. Now, we don't measure the wave function. The wave function gives the probability of measuring different things. So when we make measurements, they're probabilistic, but the underlying theory is deterministic.
And we can't determine what the outcome will be or anything.
Well, we can know with 100% accuracy the probability that a measurement will result in a certain value. We'd say absolutely the probability will be X. It will be some number which we know to arbitrary accuracy, and we can give a set of probabilities for all the different possible measurements. That's known exactly in quantum mechanics.
I wanted to talk a little bit about decoherence and what exactly that means, kind of when you move from the quantum to the macro scale, and also a little bit about superposition. I don't know if you've seen the new show on Apple TV called Dark Matter, which is all about kind of moving in different
No, I don't tend
quantum.
to watch those kind of shows because they always upset me because they get everything so screwed up. Yeah.
Uh, well, but yeah, those are some interesting concepts. Maybe we don't have time for those. What about in Sabine Hossenfender's book
Oh,
Existential Physics about the universal brain, which might maybe the connectome kind of can match up to clusters, and it could. I was even thinking this could be like something like Spinoza would propose that the whole universe is like a mind or something. I assume you don't subscribe to any of.
no, I mean I know Sabina's book and I reviewed it and I also talked to her about it. But I don't see any evidence that the universe has any overwhelming consciousness, awareness, purpose, or anything else. No.
Yeah, she also said in that book near the end, it was a little surprising, talking about the relation between science and religion, that she kind of subscribed to the Stephen Jay Gould NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, that they kind of both are different realms and both complement each other. And I'm thinking like, no, they make different predictions, they have different outcomes, different methods. What do you think? What is your take on that?
I think you just said it right, and I think I agree more with Richard Dawkins on that. Religion, to the
Yeah,
extent that religion doesn't make any predictions, it's totally complementary. But religions, at least organized religions, all make statements about the universe that are all false, and so therefore they're not compatible with science. About
right.
the history of the universe and about the way things work, they require the laws of physics to be violated in order for things to happen, and therefore they're not consistent with a universe governed by laws of nature that we measure. Now, you can say I can have a religion that that just says God created the universe and then watch football games for the rest of eternity, but and that won't be inconsistent with science. But I don't see it adds very much.
I think even obviously religion's own methods are unreliable. That's why we have so many different religions, and they can never uncover anything, and they've kind of been going in the same circles.
It's what I said before. Revelation doesn't produce knowledge. Maybe it produces
Yep.
wisdom at some level, but the only knowledge we get about the world is by looking outward, not inward.
Yeah.
And the claims of all the world's major religions, the claims about the past and the way the universe works, are simply wrong. So they're incompatible with science. Now, if you want to say, well, those claims are allegorical or metaphorical, and we don't really mean that, but we're talking about some divine, whatever. Well, once you become vague enough, then you can avoid any inconsistency with science. But then it reminds me of my favorite line from an old Dick Van Dyke show: "What on the surface seems vague is in reality meaningless."
And by what criteria are you determining what's metaphorical, right?
Yeah. I mean, religion always basically says, "Oh, well, okay, we thought this, but now we've discovered this, so we really didn't think that, really." So
Mm.
it's always slipping. It's slippery, and I used to argue that, well, I still argue that we can't prove God doesn't exist. That's a true statement, but we can say that the predictions and claims of the world's organized religions are inconsistent with science, and it's in it's dishonest to say anything else.
Yeah, I look at it as a hypothesis that's full of holes, and you can talk about them for days. So that's how I kind of look at it.
Bertrand Russell gave a famous example. Um,
Yeah.
I can't prove there's no teapot orbiting Jupiter, but that doesn't mean there is. Anyway,
Right. There you go. I'm a big fan of Bertrand Russell. Just wanted to mention Jordan Peterson really quick because I saw an interview you did with him, I think 2 years ago. I think you've had more than one. Just fascinating guy because in some moments, he seems to know what he's talking about, and he has really interesting insights into mythology and maybe the human psyche. But man,
he's
when he
all over
talks
the
about
map, isn't he? He's all over the map. I agree. Jordan
yeah,
Peterson says some really interesting things and argues for important injustices, and I agree with him there. And he makes other statements that I disagree with completely or that appear to make no sense. And Jordan and I have had 2 podcasts, and I try and call him out when I think that's the case. And when I call him out, he's usually, "Oh yeah, okay." He usually says, "Oh yeah, you're right. I didn't say that right," or whatever. But he's certainly all over the map. But he does make every now and then some important points.
well, he said atheism is an illegal chess move.
Well,
And
I
he's
think his religion, I think his views on religion are muddled, and every time I try and corner them on that, I don't get anything that makes sense. So he believes myth is very important in the human psyche, and I think he's probably right about that, but that doesn't mean it's real. And I think he argues that it's not only important for the human psyche, but we become worse if we get rid of our mythologies. And I don't agree there, and I think we can supplant them with other things in a healthy and valuable way. And
yeah, well, he's obsessed with Adam and Eve, and that's a story that kind of glorifies misogyny and ignorance, and it has so many logical contradictions. And
I think he likes.
God punishing things for being how he made them and knew they were going to be, and
I
condemning
don't know if he
innocent
really believes
descendants.
it. I mean, he certainly talks as if he does, but I don't know if he really does. I think he argues that this fundamental myth is part of evolutionary psychology has always produced these kind of things, and it's a central part of our zeitgeist and a central part of the brain, or way our brain is wired, and therefore it's an important part of being human. And I don't buy that.
Yeah. Well, in closing, Mr. Krauss, you talked about loss of faith and how you don't like to look at that as a loss, and I agree with you. You gain reality and you gain a lot of things, but I would say, and you lose delusion really, and a lot of other things that are
You
not.
find out about more neat. You find out about neater illusions. Like I could do magic tricks for you. They're pretty neat, but doesn't mean they're real. Anyway.
Right. But anyway, yeah, I agree with that. And I was thinking about that statement, and I think one thing you could say that you do lose is your belief, your conviction that you don't die really, that you live forever. And there are arguments that you wouldn't want to live forever that are more or less, reasonable. But the one way I looked at it is I thought, what if you look at your life like it's kind of an eternity, right? And it's made up of its own little world, and you can look at every great moment as a bit of heaven if you want. I don't know if you had any thought what you might
Well,
say
I
about
mean, that's fine. I don't think, that's, if that makes you happy, that's fine. The bottom line is that because our life is finite, every moment is more precious than it would be if it wasn't. That we enjoy our brief moment in the sun, as I like to say.
Yeah. Well, all right, Mr. Krauss, again, thanks so much for being back on. Enjoy the conversation. Enjoy your books.
Good.
All right.
Okay. You take care. Have fun.
Foresight paradigm, fine. A foresight paradigm. Foresight paradigm, you fine. A foresight paradigm. I fight for sight.